The sunlight streaming through the blinds felt harsher than usual that morning, dragging me from a restless sleep. I reached out instinctively, expecting to find Jenny's warmth beside me. Instead, my hand met cold, empty sheets. My chest tightened. She wasn't in bed. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she'd gotten up early, something rare but not impossible. But as I sat up, the unease lingered, clinging to me like damp clothes. Jenny wasn't a morning person. If the sun was still rising, she'd usually be tucked under the covers, her face buried in the pillow. The smell of coffee drew me into the kitchen, where her mug sat on the counter, untouched. A faint smudge of her favorite nude lipstick clung to the rim, the only sign she'd been there at all. The house was quiet, too quiet. I called her name once, twice, but the silence that followed made my pulse quicken. I found her in the living room. She was curled up on the couch, staring out the window with a faraway look in her eyes. It wasn't unusual to find her daydreaming, but there was something about the way her shoulders hunched that felt different, defensive, guarded. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my voice light. She turned her head sharply, startled, and forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, fine. Just thinking." I hesitated, studying her. The shadows under her eyes, the stiffness in her posture. It didn't look like nothing. "Anything you want to talk about?" "No," she said quickly, standing up and brushing past me. "Just work stuff." I didn't press. I should have pressed. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but the strange moment stayed with me, circling in my mind like a vulture. Jenny and I had been married for 12 years. I knew her, or at least, I thought I did. That evening, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off. As we ate dinner, she was unusually quiet, poking at her food without eating much. When her phone buzzed on the table, she snatched it up immediately, her fingers moving quickly over the screen. She glanced at me, her eyes darting away like a child caught sneaking candy. "Work email," she mumbled, tucking the phone into her lap. My stomach nodded, but I said nothing. It wasn't like Jenny to guard her phone like that. We had always been the kind of couple who left their devices lying around without a second thought. But this wasn't the first time I'd noticed her acting this way lately. That night, as she fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying the past few weeks in my mind. The unexplained absences, the sudden protectiveness over her phone, the half-hearted excuses that had started to creep into her explanations. It wasn't just my imagination. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what. The first tangible crack appeared a week later. I was cleaning the bathroom. Jenny had gone out to run errands, and I spotted something on the floor near the sink. A small, metallic glint caught my eye, reflecting the sunlight streaming through the window. I crouched to pick it up, my pulse quickening as I realized what it was. The backing of a birth control pill packet. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Jenny hadn't been on the pill in years. After our second child, I'd had a vasectomy. We decided together that 2 kids were our perfect number, and she hadn't needed the pills since. So why now? The question echoed in my mind as I searched the bathroom for answers. In the back of a cabinet, hidden beneath a jumble of loose hair ties and an old makeup bag, I found it. A blister pack of pills, half empty. I stared at it, my chest tight with a mixture of confusion and dread. I wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. Maybe her doctor had prescribed them for something unrelated to pregnancy. But a darker thought clawed its way into my mind, insidious and relentless. I put the pills back where I found them, my hands trembling. When Jenny came home later that afternoon, I studied her face, looking for signs of guilt or unease. But she was the picture of normalcy, chatting about the kids and the errands she'd run as if everything was fine. That night, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed time to process, to figure out if I was overreacting or if my gut was right. The days that followed were a blur of quiet tension. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The way she always kept her phone close, the sudden flurry of late-night texts, the errands that seemed to take longer than they should. Each detail was a thread, unraveling the fabric of the life I thought we'd built together. I began to doubt myself. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the pills were nothing, and I was reading too much into her behavior. But the unease wouldn't go away. One evening, while Jenny was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at it, my heart pounding. The message preview on the screen was innocuous. "Can't wait to see you again." No name, just a string of emojis. I froze, the weight of the message sinking in like a stone. She had always been a private person, but this wasn't privacy. This was secrecy. I didn't sleep that night. As Jenny lay beside me, her breathing slow and even, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, I made a decision. I ordered a set of surveillance cameras and a voice recorder. It felt wrong, invasive even, but I couldn't keep living in the dark. If there was nothing to find, I'd apologize and move on. But if there was something, the cameras arrived 2 days later. I installed them while Jenny was at work, placing one in the living room, another in the kitchen, and a third in our bedroom. I tucked the voice recorder beneath the driver's seat of her car, my hands shaking as I worked. When she came home that evening, I watched her closely, searching for signs that she'd noticed anything. But she seemed oblivious, moving through the house with the same calm efficiency she always had. For a moment, I wondered if I was losing my mind, chasing shadows. But then her phone buzzed, and the look on her face, part excitement, part guilt, erased any doubt. The first recordings revealed nothing. Days passed, and Jenny's behavior remained carefully normal. But one night, as I reviewed the footage from the living room camera, my heart stopped. Jenny was on the couch, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I can't talk long," she said. "He's still awake." I paused the video, my breath catching. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. Who was she talking to? And what was she hiding from me? I replayed the clip over and over, each word carving deeper into my chest. The answer was clear, even if I didn't want to believe it. Jenny was lying to me. About what? I didn't know yet, but I was going to find out. The next few days were an exercise in controlled paranoia. I moved through my daily routines like a man sleepwalking, while beneath the surface, my mind spun with plans and questions. Jenny seemed none the wiser, her behavior maddeningly normal. But that only added to my suspicion. Was she that good at lying, or had I been this blind? The recordings continued. I reviewed them obsessively, combing through every word, every glance, every nuance. Most of it was benign. Jenny cooking dinner, watching Netflix, scrolling through her phone. But every now and then, there were flashes of something darker. A hurried phone call, a cryptic text she'd delete almost immediately. Whoever she was talking to, she was careful not to leave a trail. Then there was the money. It started with an innocuous email from our bank, notifying me of a recent transaction. At first, I thought it was a routine charge, groceries or gas. But when I opened the statement, my stomach dropped. $2,500 had been transferred to an account I didn't recognize. The recipient was listed only as FDP Consulting. I called the bank, keeping my voice calm, and asked for details. They couldn't provide much beyond confirming the account was real and active. When I asked Jenny about it that evening, I tried to keep my tone casual. "Hey, did you transfer some money to a consulting company recently?" She froze for just a fraction of a second, a blink, a hesitation in her breath. "Oh, yeah," she said, turning back to her cutting board. "It's for work. We're hiring them to help with some grant applications." Her explanation was plausible enough, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right. Her voice had the flat, rehearsed quality of someone covering their tracks. That night, I did something I never thought I'd do. I cloned her phone. It wasn't as complicated as I'd imagined. A quick trip to a tech forum and a few discreet purchases later, I had everything I needed. While she was in the shower, I synced her phone with the cloning device and downloaded all her messages, emails, and call logs onto a burner phone I'd bought earlier that day. What I found was strange. There were no messages from whoever she'd been talking to on the living room camera. No incriminating texts or calls. But there was a lot of activity on an encrypted app one didn't recognize, something called Signal. It wasn't an app she'd used before, at least not to my knowledge. The messages on Signal were wiped clean, but the frequency of her usage was telling. She'd spent hours on the app in the past month, often late at night or during the times she claimed to be running errands. Whatever was happening, she was taking extra precautions to keep it hidden. The next day, I decided to take things a step further. If I was going to uncover the truth, I needed help. I reached out to an old friend from college, Scott, who now worked in cybersecurity. Scott was the kind of guy who could hack a corporate server before his morning coffee. If anyone could help me unravel this, it was him. We met at a coffee shop downtown. I kept my explanation vague, framing it as a work-related investigation. Scott didn't press for details. He never did. But I could tell he was intrigued. "I can't access Signal directly," he said, scrolling through his laptop as he spoke. "Their encryption is top-notch, but I can run a trace on the account linked to it. Might give us some breadcrumbs." "Do it," I said, my voice tight. "And anything else you can find. I'll pay whatever it takes." He glanced up at me, raising an eyebrow. "This isn't about work, is it?" "Just let me know what you find," I said, avoiding his gaze. While Scott worked on tracing the Signal account, I turned my attention back to the financial side of things. The transfer to FDP Consulting nagged at me. If it was really for work, why hadn't Jenny mentioned it before? And why was the amount so high? I dug through our bank records, going back months. At first, everything seemed normal. Grocery bills, utilities, the occasional splurge at a department store. But then I noticed a pattern. Regular transfers, always in odd amounts, to the same account. $1,200 here, $3,000 there, every few weeks like clockwork. This wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a habit. Scott called me 2 days later. "I've got something," he said. "The Signal account is registered to an email address, burner account, obviously, but I managed to trace the IP logs. The messages are coming from a second phone." "A second phone?" I repeated, my pulse quickening. "Yeah, probably a prepaid device. The good news is, if she's using it for Signal, she's probably using it for other things too. Calls, texts, maybe even financial stuff. If you can get your hands on it, I can pull everything." I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. A second phone. Jenny had always been a minimalist, the kind of person who hated clutter and gadgets. The thought of her carrying a second phone, hidden somewhere out of sight, sent a chill through me. I started watching her more closely, paying attention to the little details. She always kept her purse close, never letting it out of her sight. At night, she'd lock the bathroom door when she went in, something she'd never done before. And then, one night, I saw it. She was in the bedroom, getting ready for bed. As she pulled her phone out of her bag, something else fell to the floor. A sleek, black phone that wasn't hers. She froze for a split second, her eyes darting to me, before scooping it up and shoving it back into her purse. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Just dropped my charger." But I'd seen enough. The second phone was real. And now, I just needed a way to get to it. The opportunity came a few days later. Jenny had left her purse on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to put the kids to bed. My hands shook as I opened it, rifling through the contents until I found the phone. It was locked, of course, but that didn't matter. I tucked it into my pocket and left the house, driving to Scott's apartment across town. He didn't ask any questions when I handed him the phone, just plugged it into his laptop and got to work. An hour later, he handed it back to me, his expression grim. "You were right," he said. "There's a lot on here. Messages, call logs, emails, and bank transfers, dozens of them." My stomach churned as I scrolled through the data. The messages were filled with coded language, but the context was clear. Jenny wasn't just cheating. She was hiding something bigger. Money was moving in and out of accounts I'd never seen before, some with names I didn't recognize, others with labels like investment fund or consulting fees. This wasn't just an affair. This was something else entirely. The drive back home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and my mind raced, teetering between fury and disbelief. Every message I'd read on that second phone, every financial transfer, pointed to a web of deception far more complex than I'd imagined. The encrypted messages were mostly to someone named AR. The conversations were clipped but intimate, the kind of shorthand you develop with someone you trust implicitly, or someone you're conspiring with. But there was something else. Hidden among the flirty banter were references to accounts, timelines, and a cryptic mention of, when he's out of the picture. Was I he? Was I the obstacle? Scott had also uncovered a series of withdrawals from our joint savings account, each one funneled into another account with the same FDP consulting label. Jenny wasn't just siphoning money. She was preparing for something. A future without me. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. The kids were asleep, and Jenny was in the living room, scrolling on her phone. She looked up as I walked in, her expression soft and disarming. "You're home late," she said, her voice casual, as if she hadn't been plotting behind my back. The audacity of it made my blood boil. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a smile. "Long day at work." Over the next few days, I played my part carefully. I acted normal, affectionate, even. While beneath the surface, I was strategizing. Confronting Jenny outright wouldn't work. She'd deny everything, turn it around on me, make me doubt what I knew. No, this required precision. First, I had to secure my assets. If Jenny was planning to drain our accounts, I needed to act fast. I contacted my financial advisor, someone I'd worked with for years and trusted implicitly. Without revealing too much, I explained that I needed to protect my finances from potential liabilities. "Let's move the bulk of your savings into a trust," he suggested. "Something in your name only. We'll keep just enough in the joint account to avoid suspicion." It was a start. The next step was gathering more evidence. I'd already seen enough to know Jenny was lying, but I needed proof solid enough to leave no room for doubt. Not just for me, but for the inevitable fallout when this all came to light. I expanded my surveillance. Scott set me up with tracking software to monitor her second phone remotely. Every text, every email, every GPS ping was now at my fingertips. I also planted a GPS tracker in her car, hidden in the lining of the driver's seat. If she thought she could sneak away, she was wrong. 2 days later, I got my first major break. The GPS tracker showed her car parked at a high-end hotel downtown, far from any place she'd normally frequent. I sat in my own car, parked a block away, watching the entrance with a knot in my stomach. After 20 minutes, Jenny emerged, wearing a sleek black dress I hadn't seen before. She wasn't alone. A man in a tailored suit walked beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of confidence that came with money and power. I took a series of photos, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. As they walked toward a waiting car, she leaned into him, her laughter echoing faintly across the street. It wasn't just an affair. This was a business transaction. The man opened the passenger door for her, and she slipped inside. The car pulled away, and I followed at a safe distance. They stopped at a private dining club, the kind of place where deals are made behind closed doors. I parked a block away and watched through binoculars as they entered. Jenny wasn't just seeing him, she was working with him. But why? That night, I pored over the data from her phone, desperate to make sense of what I'd seen. The name AR appeared again and again, but now there were mentions of Richard. It clicked. The man I'd followed was Richard, a prominent real estate developer, known for his shady dealings and legal troubles. What the hell was Jenny doing with him? The financial transactions started to make sense. FDP Consulting was a front, a shell company tied to Richard's operations. Jenny wasn't just cheating, she was laundering money. The realization hit me like a freight train. She wasn't planning to leave quietly. She was building an escape route, one that would leave me broke and blindsided while she walked away with everything. But then, something unexpected happened. As I reviewed more of the messages, I noticed a pattern. Jenny wasn't just working with Richard, she was playing him. Buried in the encrypted texts were subtle hints of manipulation. She was feeding him information, keeping him on edge, dangling promises without delivering. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was double-crossing him. For a moment, I didn't know whether to feel furious or impressed. Jenny was playing a dangerous game, one that could backfire at any moment. But if I timed it right, I could use it against her. Now that I knew the stakes, my plans for revenge began to crystallize. But I had to be careful. If Jenny suspected I was onto her, she'd pull the trigger early, leaving me with nothing. I needed to bide my time, gather more evidence, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. I started building a dossier. Every message, every bank transfer, every photo of her and Richard went into a secure file. I recorded conversations from the voice recorder in her car, capturing snippets of phone calls that painted a damning picture. At the same time, I began quietly aligning allies. Scott was my tech guy, but I also reached out to a private investigator I'd found through a referral. His job was to dig into Richard's background, looking for leverage that could tip the scales in my favor. The final piece of the puzzle was setting up a failsafe. I drafted a letter, detailing everything I'd discovered, and left it with my lawyer. If anything happened to me, if Jenny or Richard tried to pull something drastic, the letter would go public. The morning began like any other, the house silent except for the muffled hum of the dishwasher and the faint chirp of birds outside. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Today wasn't just another day. It was the culmination of weeks of planning, lies, and discovery. Today, I would set everything in motion. Jenny moved around the kitchen with her usual grace, a cup of coffee in her hand and her phone buzzing with constant messages. I watched her from the doorway, her back turned to me, and felt a strange mix of anger and sadness. 12 years of marriage, 2 kids, countless memories, all reduced to this. Heading out soon? I asked, keeping my voice light. Yeah, she said, glancing over her shoulder with a smile that no longer reached her eyes. Lots to do today. I nodded, hiding the tightness in my chest. Have a good one. As the door closed behind her, I felt my pulse quicken. It was time. I waited until her car disappeared down the street before grabbing my laptop. Scott's latest report had arrived that morning, and it confirmed everything I needed to know. Jenny and Richard had a meeting scheduled at noon at one of his private properties, a sprawling estate on the edge of town. It was the perfect place for their schemes, tucked away from prying eyes. But today, there would be eyes. My eyes. I packed the tools I'd carefully prepared, a high-resolution camera, a recording device, and a file of documents I'd compiled over the past month. Each piece was a weapon, a shard of truth that would dismantle Jenny's carefully constructed web of lies. Before I left, I sent an encrypted email to my lawyer with the subject line, "Execute if no contact by midnight." Attached were copies of every document, photo, and recording I'd gathered. If anything went wrong, this would ensure the truth came out. The estate was as ostentatious as I'd imagined, a gated mansion surrounded by acres of manicured lawns. I parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, my heart pounding. The cameras I'd hidden in Jenny's car and purse had already confirmed their location. All I had to do was get close enough to gather the final piece of evidence. Crouching behind a row of hedges, I positioned my camera and zoomed in on the large windows that framed the back of the house. Through the glass, I could see them, Jenny and Richard, seated at a marble table. Papers were spread out before them, their faces intent. I activated the recording device, the tiny green light blinking steadily. Their voices were muffled, but I could make out enough. "This will put us in the clear," Richard was saying, tapping a document with his pen. "Once the funds are transferred, he won't even know what hit him." Jenny leaned back, a smirk tugging at her lips. "And you're sure there's no way to trace it?" "Positive," Richard replied. "By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late." My stomach churned. They weren't just planning to drain our accounts. They were setting me up to take the fall. But I wasn't the fool they thought I was. As they finalized their plans, I slipped back to my car and drove to the next phase of the operation. The private investigator I'd hired had been following Richard for weeks, uncovering every skeleton in his closet. Bribes, embezzlement, offshore accounts. It was a laundry list of crimes waiting to be exposed. I sent an anonymous tip to a contact at the local paper, attaching Richard's dossier along with the recordings from today's meeting. Within minutes, the wheels were in motion. The story would break by the evening, and Richard's world would come crashing down. But I wasn't done yet. I returned home and waited. When Jenny walked through the door that evening, she looked distracted, her brow furrowed. "Hey," she said absently, dropping her bag on the counter. "How was your day?" I asked, my tone deceptively casual. "Fine," she replied, heading toward the bedroom. "Just busy." I followed her, my heart pounding. "Jenny," I said, My voice steady but firm. We need to talk. She froze, her hand on the doorknob. About what? About this. I tossed a manila envelope onto the bed. Inside were printed copies of her messages, bank transfers, and photos of her with Richard. Her face went pale as she opened it, her hands trembling. Evan, I can explain. Don't bother. I cut her off. I've seen enough. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her composure crumbling. It's not what it looks like, she said weakly. I was just trying to protect us. Protect us? I laughed bitterly. You've been lying to me, stealing from me, and planning to frame me. How exactly does that protect us? Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. No pity, no regret. Just a cold, relentless determination. I've already sent everything to my lawyer, I continued. The recordings, the financial records, the photos. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know the truth about you, about Richard, about everything. Her eyes widened in panic. Evan, please, don't do this. We can fix this. I shook my head. You made your choice, Jenny. Now you'll face the consequences. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Richard's empire crumbled under the weight of the scandal, and Jenny's name was dragged into the fray. She was implicated as an accomplice, her financial dealings scrutinized by both the media and the authorities. Our divorce was swift and brutal. With the evidence I'd gathered, I was able to protect my assets and secure custody of the kids. Jenny's world, once so meticulously curated, fell apart piece by piece. In the end, she tried to reach out, begging for forgiveness, pleading for another chance. But I was done. The woman I'd loved, the life we'd built together, it was gone, replaced by a hollow shell of betrayal. And as I stood in the quiet of my new home, watching the sun set on a life I'd thought was unshakable, I felt a strange sense of peace. Jenny had tried to destroy me, but in the end, she'd only destroyed herself. And that's how it ended. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts below.